Okay.
Hey,
So we're going to
Aaron,
read, yeah,
thank you for saying that. I That helps me a lot hearing other people feeling similarly, and that was a great reminder for me. So that feels like an energetic like nugget to hang on to. So
yeah,
I
great.
just needed to say thank you for that.
Good, good, good. I'm glad. Yeah, I hope to, I invite any of you, if I forget to say that or something like that, I think it's a really great way to start a study group. We're not trying to like follow Walter Russell as our guru. We're not trying to follow Ra as our guru. We're not trying to follow anybody as our guru. We're trying to find the truth of the matter. And so we seek these sources that are deeply in tune with that. And to the degree they help us find it, that's great. And to the degree they confuse us or make us feel rotten, then fuck it. Leave it behind. So yeah, great. Let's do that. We're going to read chapters 7, 8, and 9. And hopefully that'll go smoothly. We have an hour and 15 minutes to do so. Would anybody like to start?
I can start.
Great.
Knowledge versus thinking. Man's knowledge is his power. His thinking is the expression of that power. The expression of power is not power. Therefore, thinking is not power. A man gradually becomes aware of his omniscience. His thinking intensifies in voltage in proportion to the increase in awareness of his omniscience. Thinking is an electric wave extension from the centering fulcrum of knowledge, which seemingly divides knowledge into ideas and sets those ideas in motion to create forms of ideas as product of knowledge. Man's knowledge is like a deep well of still water. His thinking is like a two-way pump, which divides the quality of that stillness into the quantities of parts and sets them flowing. That is what the objective universe is. Quantities of many seemingly separate forms of idea, all of which are but parts of the one whole idea. Each seemingly separate part is a dynamic extension of the one static unity. But separateness only seems, for all are indissolubly bound together in light as one part. Knowledge is the foundation of man's concepts. Thinking transfers concepts into product. The quality of man's product depends upon the degree of awareness of his knowledge and is not upon the quality, quantity, or intensity of his thinking. Water cannot be drawn from an empty well, nor can clear water be drawn from a muddied well. Likewise, good product cannot come from intensive thinking unless knowledge backs that thinking. No idea of mind can ever become matter. Idea of product can never become product. Moreover, no expression of anything in nature is the idea which it expresses. The product of idea is not the idea it simulates. Idea is cosmic and cannot be produced in matter. Idea must be conceived in the mind before it can be simulated as product. Conceptions belong solely to the magnetic godlight and never become matter. A lever, for example, moving upon its fulcrum, expresses the idea of power by motion, but the idea of power is in the still fulcrum source of power. It is not in the moving lever. The lever would be both powerless and motionless if it did not have the stillness of the fulcrum from which to extend the simulation of power. A watch expresses the idea of time, but the watch is not time. Otherwise, it expresses the idea of mechanical principles, But the watch is not the idea which is expressed by those mechanical principles. The printed poem is not the idea expressed in the poem. The printed poem has no meaning to anyone whose intelligence is insufficient to reflect the idea from the composer's mind to his own. No idea of mind ever becomes matter. Likewise, neither the musical composition on the printed page nor the art of music, which issues as sounds from musical instruments, is the inspired idea of the musician. Inspiration can never be produced. It can but be reflected from one inspired mind to another recognizing one. Idea and inspiration may be echoed from the spirit to spirit, but they can never become product of matter in motion.
Thanks. It's great reading. It's very nicely read, Mia. So how's that land?
Well, I realized I read the wrong chapters.
Oh, which ones did you read?
I think 12. The Roman numerals got me.
Oh yeah. Darn it.
So I was like a little kind of catching up and then don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad you're here, Natalie. I really am. I really admire you pushing through. Just
Ooh.
being you. Hmm.
What is
I
he
really, oh, go ahead.
what is he saying?
He's saying that knowledge or the truth or God's one infinite thought never becomes. It never manifests. This is so paradoxical. This material is so paradoxical. But the idea never becomes real. It never becomes form. The form is but a reflection of or an expression of the idea. But the expression of the idea is not the idea.
In and of itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's so obvious, and it's so dumbly obvious that it's like hard to be like, yeah, so what's the big deal? But at another level, this is really hard for me to grok, actually. And I've read this chapter probably 7 times now, and it's still like, wait, what? Like, I still can catch my mind being really challenged by the idea that a thing is not its idea. Like, I conflate them. Like, I get really enamored with what is created, and I forget that it's not the thing that it was created to. Well, anyway.
Can I see if I understand? Can I say?
Yeah, please do.
I am an expression of an idea, but I'm not the real I. Like this experience of this body and these words coming out of this mouth is an expression of an idea, but not actually the idea.
Correct.
The chair is an expression of an idea of a chair, but not actually the conception of the chair.
Yeah. And let's start with the chair.
Yeah.
It's a little easier to grok than Natalie. But why is that chair there? Why is that chair there?
Well, because some designer at IKEA drew it and then chose some fabric and then had some people do some stuff with wood and foam. I mean, from one perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's there so I can sit on it.
Yeah. It's the
Yeah.
product of someone's idea. Whoever that designer was had an idea for that particular chair. And, you know, whatever and that was, I'm sure that wasn't just a monolithic idea. There's some complex of ideas, but that chair is just the product of that idea. It's not the idea.
A product with purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It's the production of the idea, but there was a purpose that inspired the idea, which inspired the energy around the making of it, and then the purpose of it was the initial spark of the inspiration for it.
So on page 39, so it says, no expression of anything in nature is the idea which it expresses. So the chair is not, I just lost it. The chair is just the expression. It's not the idea that came from like you said, the conception.
Yeah. It's the product of someone's idea. And there's a couple things here I want to get into. One is, Walter Russell makes a pretty clear distinction between product in nature and product in man's, mankind's, humans, people's lives. So and this comports with what Ross says too. Like first and second density, I think is what we would call nature. So animals, plants, everything in the universe prior to third density, which is not a chair. That's obvious, but there's a distinction, and the distinction is, and I think it's in this week's reading that we'll get to this, that basically once you get to third density, we co-create with God. We have the faculty of mind that's capable of drawing inspiration from the creator and expressing that. And everything in first and second density doesn't, everything in nature is with God. It's like, it's not co-created with God. It's like God is creating it, which is fascinating because Ross says that basically first and second density life, as far as I understand it, are generated by the logos. Like they don't have their own self-awareness yet, and so they're basically the logos. Plants and animals and mineral life is all like the logos being with us here, in nature. Anyway, so that's just one distinction that I think Walter Russell really really drives home, is like the distinction between nature and mankind. But the other thing that's more central to our reading right now is, Walter Russell says there is nothing in creation that wasn't preceded by idea. It's impossible. There's nothing that can just blink into existence that has no idea. It's just like a random creation. Everything is an expression of some portion of God's infinite thought, infinite idea. So thought always precedes, concept always precedes its form, its manifestation. Yeah, BJ.
I think a way that I'm making sense of this right now is like, like this is a unified cosmology. Like this is a telling of how all things are one. So, a lot of times in the telling of how all things are one, we have to go through what things are not. Like that's a like in Hindu tradition that's often called neti neti, like not this, not that. And so we can think about what the chair isn't. And what's helpful to me also is thinking about, okay, well, it's all just pointing back to oneness. And I appreciate at the end of chapter 9, page 53, he says it's difficult to conceive Earth and all of its phenomena as motion, sound, people, animals, and plant life as a motion picture projection from our sun. Yet all of the separate ideas of Earth are in that one incandescent light of the sun. All are but one thing, light. And I appreciate that image because it's similar to images that I've gotten from other teachings, or like if you think of like you're watching a movie and it looks like on the screen there's a chair and there's a person and there's a tree, and they seem to be these different things. But really, if you like turn around and look back at the projector, there's just one light. It's just one thing. And to me, that's a helpful image and metaphor of like the chair seems like a chair. I'm like, yeah, relatively it's a chair. But what we're here for is the unified cosmology and like the understanding of how all things are one. And how is it that all things are one? Like finding the unified expression. So anyway, I find that the cinema, the projector image to be helpful, but also the like the stillness, like when he talks about the fulcrum, like that feels like an embodied way that I can be with the oneness. Anyway, that's what's here for me right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to just build off what you said in terms of the, just what you were mentioning about why do we do this? And from my perspective, like, we're not going to get it with our minds. We're not going to get oneness, mentally. But I think that it conditions the mind to be receptive and open to allow contact with intelligent infinity, to allow the experience of oneness with light, with the creator, with our source, to come ever closer and be ever more available. I've had to do a lot of wrestling with my mind to get to where I'm at now, to be open to this kind of philosophy. And I think it helps not like, from my perspective, it's not like studying this doesn't help like, oh, eventually I'm going to get it with the mind, but it helps condition the mind to kind of play along with the spirit or something, to like be on the same team of like awareness being ready to like meet itself fully or something like that. I don't know if that made sense, but just a little on the why. Yeah, Nia?
Does anybody have handy the Latwii quote from 1975 that you commented on earlier today that Neil
Yeah.
posted for us?
Mm-hmm.
That, I forget, obviously there was more there, but the gist to me, the takeaway was knowing that we will never have understanding in third density is already just coming to understand that we won't have that understanding until we're at another density. We won't truly get that understanding of oneness. That I've been sitting with that all day. That was absolutely perfect. And meditation being the key to that. The quote doesn't so much better, but I see you looking it up. But that feels very relevant to what we're talking about here.
You might be referring to the quote that BJ shared in 1639. Don says, "I'm assuming it is not necessary for an individual to understand the law of one to go
Yes.
from third to fourth density. Is that correct?" And Ra says, "I am Ra. It is absolutely necessary that an entity consciously realize it does not understand. in order for,
Yes.
for it to be harvestable. Understanding is not of this density.
There, that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, BJ. I thought it was a couple of shares were today and I got them mixed up. But yeah, that was perfect. Absolutely perfect.
Yeah.
That just, to me, that sums up.
Yep.
It does to me too. And one of the things that I find, in that my intention is to get into tomorrow with the practice of inquiry. When what I find is like, to sort of come back to the projector image, like thinking can project too. Or at least it seems as though, I don't know whether Walter Russell would agree with this, but like, it seems as though thinking can project too. And when I'm in the mode of thinking in an attempt to understand, it like clouds up the veil and I can't really understand. And when I personally, in my own practice, when I'm able to be in a way of releasing the idea that I need to understand, the thinking, the thinking can subside. And again, I don't know if this is how Walter Russell would agree with how I'm putting this, but the thinking can subside, and what can be there in its places is a more of a knowing. And the knowing is like that stillness, like the fulcrum image, that is power, like the stillness of knowing of what I am. And to me, that's power. Like that's where I know that all things are one, and I know my unconditional well-being, and I know like goodness. Yeah.
To me, that also overlaps, or you could say it blends with, like, the feathered edges blends with acceptance. The idea that, or the knowing, the knowing that we understand that we won't understand, and the acceptance of that feels like that kind of like weaves all of those together for me. I don't know, I don't know if I can explain it, and my brain is so tired, y'all. I'm sorry. Words are not coming, but there's this sensation, this feeling of understanding how those kind of all blend.
One of the ways that it blends for me, and maybe, well, yeah, one of the ways that it blends for me is I think a lot of times we attempt to understand in order to have like a sense of safety in the world. And so it's connected there, that like when I can relax and surrender into trust or faith, the mind can rest, or like, it's one way or the other. It's like rest the mind, and then I can know that everything is okay, or know that everything's okay, and then the mind rests, or whatever. Like, yeah, they're similar. And often the mind is trying to like provide our safety. Yeah.
Yeah. When I think this chapter, the main point of this chapter kind of it underscores the importance of, or the power of, like turning within ourselves for the source of the idea, for the source of knowing, for the source of like what helps us have the experience of safety, or have the experience of balance, or have the experience of, what we're really truly seeking. Which I find valuable in and of itself. There's just so much in my life and the way I experience the world. There's so much of a tendency to look to the world, to look to product, to look to form, to look to material, to look to like the things outside of us, to gain a sense of understanding, to gain a sense of safety, to gain a sense of, whatever, being oriented. And obviously that has its place. We do need to orient to the world. But I think what Walter Russell is really driving home in this chapter is the importance of being, you know, turning within and looking to the source, you know, being with idea, being with knowing, which is the center of us. You know, it's right here. It's the closest, it's the closest possible thing we could, you know, yeah, it's hard to talk about. But anyway, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. To me, it's beneficial to be reminded of and kind of like given permission to like trust with what's within and trust, you know, our capacity to know directly.
I'll say one last thing on that, because this has been monumental in my soul's growth and spiritual awakening. And in fact, I've always been a seeker in devouring spiritual knowledge and practice. However, until I hit my actual spiritual awakening, I had to be knocked down. I had to be so tired and so exhausted. And I've heard the story multiplied 1,000 times from people that they didn't get their spiritual awakening until they had been hospitalized for something, or they also too were overworked and exhausted. So our minds, for me, my motto ended up being getting out of my own way. I had to stop overthinking. I'm very attached to my analytical left brain. And I kept saying, well, I need to understand it I need to understand it logically and rationally, like a thing outside myself, to have an answer. And getting out of my own way, like pushing logical mind aside and allowing the internal wisdom to come forth, has been um different. It's a test. It's a very hard test for me, specifically because, again, with that like left brain of constantly seeking answers. And I didn't ever think before that I was seeking answers outside myself until I got to the level of exhaustion that was a health issue at that point, where I literally couldn't fight myself anymore. I couldn't keep my walls up anymore. I didn't have the energy to continue to think my way through things, which had always gotten me through before in the last 20 something years of spiritual seeking. So it got to the point where putting that analytical mind aside, putting the idea mind aside, to allow to get to a point where I could even tap into that wisdom, to find that. And a lot of, there's all this talk about finding the wisdom within, but that looks different for different people. They think the wisdom is self-oriented when you first hear that. And then we dig into this and we talk about the energy inside everlasting rock that has the one infinite creator's energy moving through everything. And that is what we're actually tapping into inside ourselves, our piece of self that is the expression of the idea of the Big Bang effect of our existence being the expression of the one infinite creator. That's what we're tapping into with that. That's where music isn't the sheet notes. It's the time isn't the watch. We are not ourselves, scientifically being 10% human. We ourselves are not the thing. It's the idea within that one infinite creator's expression that reminds me of the use of the analogies there.
Yep. Yeah. It's kind of tragic that there's so much, I mean, we're all like in a process of initiation. It's just that the way that we do it these days is like super inefficient and tragic until we can learn to trust the inner resources that we have available to us. Yeah, and sorry, initiation's on my mind because I'm like reading all these accounts of like ancient forms of initiation and feeling deep yearning for that community and depth. Okay. Okay, so we read chapter 7. Let's read chapter 8.
I'll read.
Great.
Chapter 8, page 42. Thinking versus sensing. Man is still primate with very few exceptions. He has not yet learned to think powerfully from knowledge. He is just beginning to think as an extension of knowledge. We sense electrically and mistake that electrical sensing of observed effects for thinking. Sensing is not thinking. Sensation is but an electrical awareness of wave motion by other waves. We mistake the electrical records of the information which our brains have recorded as sensation for thinking and for knowledge. Information thus acquired by the senses is not knowledge, however. A man may have vast information and skill, but have very little knowledge. The greatest scientists of today, for example, are well informed. They know how to do wonderful things, but do they know the why of what they do? Information from observed effects and skills in putting those effects together for useful purposes have multiplied vastly since man first observed natural phenomena. His sense of observation told him how to make a boat, then a sail for the boat. He then discovered the wheel and fire. Electric awareness of effects of motion plus memory, plus the power to reason objectively, gave him the ability to do this. Very little of it has been due to either thinking or knowledge. We thus confuse sensing for thinking and knowing, when factually we have been but functioning through sensed electrical awareness acquired from information. The information thus conveyed is electrical, not mental. The telegraph message which goes over any wire is not the thought conveyed by that message. Even the typed telegram is not the thought conveyed by it. Its symbols inform the thinker of the thought conveyed by it, but it is not the thought. Thus it is that our vast mechanistic, electrically motivated universe is intersensitized for the purpose of informing every nerve ganglion in every cell of every organic and inorganic part of it, of the condition of every other part of it. I like that part. We're a giant organism.
Mm-hmm.
Our supposedly 5 senses. In speaking of an electrical awareness, which we call sensation, we think of our senses as 5 in number. These are the senses of seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, and feeling. All of these 5 senses are but the one sense of feeling. We do not have 5 senses. Seeing is a sensation of feeling light waves through our eyes. Hearing is a sensation of feeling light waves through our ears. Tasting and smelling are sensations of feeling light waves reacting upon mouth and nostrils. All variation in sense of feeling is due to a difference of electric conditioning in pulsing wave matter. If pulsing wave matter is but an electric wave record of thought, sensation likewise is but an electric wave record of thought. Neither of them have reality. Neither of them are the thought they record. It also follows that if matter, motion, and substance are electric records of thought, then sensation has no reality, for sensation is but an electrical awareness of wave motion by other waves. It likewise follows that if matter, motion, and substance are electric wave recordings of thought, then electricity, which records thought, and thought itself are non-existent. There is but one thing in this universe, light, the still light of all knowing, the one light which is God. God alone lives. His thinking and imagining is knowing. The knowing universe is all that is. Knowing mind is still. There is no activity whatsoever in the universe of either spirit or matter. Empirical knowledge. I got the long one. Man's present civilization is erected upon the foundation of empirical knowledge obtained through his senses. What is empirical knowledge? The definition in the dictionary is conclusions founded upon experiment and observation alone. In other words, the so-called knowledge upon which man relies is founded upon the evidence of his senses, or more simply, upon the non-existent waves of motion of a non-existent substance. That fact is the answer as to why mankind has, as yet, practically no knowledge. During his amoeba and jungle days, he lived a purely sensed existence. His body cells were controlled entirely by instinctive flux threads of light extended to him directly from the Creator. Man is still new. Out of millions of such years, he has had but a few thousand years since the dawn of consciousness awakened in him the slightest suspicion of his spiritual inheritance. The advance of man since the first messengers of God appeared on earth to kindle an awakening spark in him has been based upon information gained by his senses and stored in his electric brain as memory records of sensed observations. These observations he has reasoned into sensed conclusions by an electrically sensitized brain. All of such conclusions, which are based upon the evidence of senses, have within them the elements of deception, which characterize all effects of motion in this three-dimensional universe of illusion. Man is aware of some of these illusions, such as those of perspective. He is aware of the fact that railroad tracks do not meet upon the horizon, but he is not aware of the fact that all effects of motion are not what they seem to be. He is thus misled into forming conclusions which have no relation to nature whatsoever. One can have no knowledge of effect, for all knowledge lies in cause. Our new fundamental laws and principles must be based upon knowledge of cause. Laws based upon illusion. Newton, for example, confessedly did not know what gravitation was, yet wrote laws concerning it based upon his observation as to what gravitation did to an apple. Also, he concluded that the moon would fall upon the earth if it were not for its motion. He even proved this mathematically, not being aware of the fact that those same mathematical formulae would apply to every satellite, planet, and star in the heavens, as well as to every electron and every atom, none of which are falling into their primaries. Observers in natural phenomena are still calculating the age of the universe and weight of the earth. The universe is ageless. It had no beginning. Likewise, the earth has no weight in respect to anything else in the universe. Every orb in the heavens is in perfect balance with every other orb. Messengers of the light. What little knowledge man has acquired during those last few thousand years has been given to him by the very few geniuses, prophets, mystics, and other messengers of the light who have come to re-inspire mankind with their inspired knowledge. From these rare few, the beginnings of our culture have sprung. Without them, there would be no understanding of beauty in the world. Without beauty, man would still be barbarian. Through beauty alone will he gradually become consciously aware of his oneness with the light. When man knows the light, he will know all things. Today, that light is so dim in all mankind that no one has as yet fathomed the secret of light or of gravitation, radiation, electricity, growth, life, reincarnation, or the wave. The day has now dawned when he will know these things. This is man's inheritance for this new age.
Thanks, BJ.
Okay. Can I jump in?
Yeah, please do.
So page 45, the part about man's amoeba and jungle days, and then the dawning, like the dawning realizations after that. What that put me in mind of was how we have talked about from Ra, talked about 3D humans on Earth prior to the veil, and then after the veil. And yeah, it just is really putting me in mind of the veil, and the way that thinking, okay, I look at a chair, and then my thinking about the chair is what keeps me from knowing the reality of the chair. That's through my own lens. That's what I think is true. My thinking about the reality of like that is a separate object over there, and since that is a separate object over there, then I'm this separate object over here. Like the way that we project, I guess the way that Walter Russell talks about it is electric sensation recorded. I think of it as thinking. In common language, we call that thinking. Like that is sort of like the cloud, like cloudy mist around us that keeps us from seeing, which is like seeing really. Yeah, it's like the veil. I don't think the words are coming through very clearly, but it just is really, it's putting me in mind again of the teaching from Ra about the veil. And so then again, the purposefulness of the veil has to do with spiritual evolution. Yeah, so I'm just really also in touch with like the way that we, like when we can't see truth clearly, in the amoeba, quote, amoeba and jungle phases that, to some extent we're still in the midst of. Yeah, I'm just in touch with the purposefulness of that as well.
And are you saying that in your experience, it's the veil that allows us to confuse thinking for knowing or sensing for knowing?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the seemingness of separation. That's what I think is happening. It's like that when we believe our senses tell us that things are separate. That there is a table in front of me that is holding this computer, and that, there's like that everything becomes like the multiplicity of objects rather than singleness of being. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Nia?
I want to give other people a chance to chime in if anybody else may. Natalie. Okay, I'll say it really quickly then. My mind gets really, I don't want to say caught up. I get reminded of primal human, that we are dealing with 3D DNA of animals. Like he talks about the amoeba and the jungle, that it's like we are still primal human beings. We are working towards evolving past that, using the mind as a tool to understanding, using spirit to dive down and be in touch with things that are beyond the mind, which is the whole thing I was saying earlier about getting out of our own way and just being in a state of being rather than a state of thinking. The thinking brain mind ends up as a tool to help with understanding. Then we only get so far before we have to think all we can think about it in multiple spiraling ways, and then pick that up, put that aside, and just be, and just experience that we're still led by our DNA, the idea of surviving, the idea of thinking, the fact that we think to live. It's a survival piece. That's the primal DNA that comes into, it's constantly showing up. It's constantly a survival thing. And I talk about this a lot with how we question things, as far as, why do I care what other people think when it doesn't affect me? Why does this affect me when it shouldn't? And a lot of times the answer is because we're still primal humans. And if we weren't accepted by our group, we were ostracized, which the literal meaning of the word ostracized means to turn your back unto death. So if we as primal humans were not accepted by our peers, we were ostracized from the group and we couldn't survive. We didn't have the fire, we didn't have the cave, we didn't have the warmth, we didn't have our food, we didn't have survival. So we don't realize just how much that is still driving our thought process. Just the thoughts that show up, constantly thinking, trying to understand, is actually a survival adaptation. Because if the tiger was chasing us, we got away, we're panting and our adrenaline's up in fight or flight, we have to think. That's where the thinking human mind comes in, jumping us out of animal state into primal human, to say, oh, let me replay that instance in my mind and figure out what I could have done differently. And that's not what most animals do. They just exist. So this leads us on the evolutionary track, where we're dealing with being primal human over here, and then we're flipping. Like, we're in the middle of this process of flipping. And we think we're there because we have civilization and all these man-made things, but we're still flipping to that point where we're thinking, and now we know to not think. I don't believe that thinking is, or not thinking is, as natural a state as we're trying to make it. We're working towards that. Like, we're working real, that's what this work is. Like, we are trying to find understanding, and then every bit of the teachings are telling us to let go of understanding and feel within, and allow that piece of the one infinite creator to come through. And back to the quote earlier around, understanding that you will never understand, being one of the major first steps to leveling up in density. So I don't know if that made sense, but it felt important.
I don't feel like I tracked everything you were saying, but towards the end you were saying like something along the lines of like, moving out of thought and into stillness, maybe something like that towards the end. Like, we're trying to learn how to do that. Was I getting that part right? Yeah, I feel like you could walk away from this reading thinking that like Walter Russell's kind of really down on thinking or something like that. Or that knowing is the thing, knowing is the pinnacle. But I think it's just a matter of putting these processes that really are just our mind, our body, and our spirit processing light. And they process light differently. And it's just getting them in the right place. It's just optimizing our incredibly beautiful like vehicle to be able to move skillfully through life. It's not about not thinking. It's just about, I think Walter Russell is just trying to teach, there's a faculty that actually is more truthful than thinking, or that there's something more fundamental than thinking, and we tend to miss it, or something like that. I don't know if I'm explaining it well. I'm trying to point out that from my perspective, I don't know, I could read this information and sort of think that Walter Russell is like, oh yeah, thought is like false or something, or thinking or sensing are like somehow not as fundamental or important as knowing is. But I think it's just a matter of understanding these different processes, which are a part of our tripartite self, the mind, the body, and the spirit, right? I think of knowing as of the spirit, thinking is of the mind, sensing is of the body. We do all three. They're all important. They're all super important. They're all like a major part of like how we're designed to be able to experience, how the creator put it all in place to experience. And I think that this is just a little bit of a deeper invitation into realizing what those functions are and how to use them in a good way. Does that make sense?
So I wanted to jump in. I loved on page 47, through beauty alone will man, I'll put that in there, gradually become consciously aware of their oneness with the light. When man knows the light, he will know all things. I love that. I absolutely just loved. I would love that to be engraved on my brain. Because that's like Rob would totally give a high five to that. So I wanted to point light, and that I have one other little comment to make. I don't know how I found this, but there's and I loved how you started out this conversation on this chapter. Oh my gosh, BJ, whenever you were saying about on page 45, talking about the amoeba in the jungle, because I was going to comment on that also. And I loved how it says about the instinctive flux threads of light extended to him directly from the creator. So when I first read that, I was like, ooh, and then I read it again with all y'all, and then I'm like, it's plasma. And I'm studying, so Z Earth Star is a friend of mine, and she is all about talking about plasma right now, and this it feels like plasma. And I'm watching a movie on YouTube called Thunderbolts of the Gods, and I don't know if anyone has heard of this, and I don't even know where I even came across it, but it feels very apropos to this chapter, because it talks about where creation even comes from, and it mentions plasma in there. So I wanted to just insert a plasmic energy into our conversation. Yay.
I believe that those folks that do that channel are students of Walter Russell, the Thunderbolt Project. I'm pretty sure that's the case.
I tried pulling it up real quick, but I don't know if it's Thunderbolt Project. It might be. But they're a bunch of scientists, from what I can tell.
Yeah,
yeah,
and they're exploring a unified cosmology based on the electric wave, the electric universe principle. Yeah, you're onto it, May. You're feeling it. You're feeling the resonance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
Gosh, there's a lot of pieces I was interested in diving into, but one of them I'll just mention is every orb in the heavens is in perfect balance with every other orb. The idea that the earth has no weight. Like, that's really interesting. And I don't know, it invites me into like this. I feel like that's a way to crack the code of the illusion. Of course, our experience, it seems like, things have weight, obviously, right? But only from the perspective of separation, from the perspective of like the whole system moving, it's actually all perfectly balanced. Every iota, every atom, every photon is perfectly, the whole thing is in balance. The whole universe is in balance. The net charge of the electrical universe is 0. As a system. Within the system, there's all this like push and pull. But the piece about every orb in the heavens is in perfect balance with every other orb, it like somehow that image like helps me to think of the system, like the one thing. The universe is one thing, you know, the expression of one infinite idea. And anyway, I'm not doing a very good job of talking about it, but I love that image, and it helps me break out of the pattern of thinking of separation and thinking about the parts, and it helps me like think about the whole as this like dance of like perfectly balanced ideas, thoughts, dancing thoughts.
Can I chime in with that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really liked that part too, about the idea of having no weight. And it pinged for me something that I heard from Alan Watts. I've been really hanging out and jiving with Alan Watts a lot lately, which I just learned. Oh my gosh. My grandmother, my dad's mother, she was a disciple of Alan Watts. I had no idea. She went and was with him on his ferry boat in Sausalito, which is where he would give his seminars. And those are the seminars that I've been listening to, audio recordings from the 70s. She was there. I had zero idea. Okay. So that's fascinating. Okay. That was a side note. But one thing that he was talking about the other day in my ear, not really the other day, but he was saying a similar thing. The universe has no location. The question of where is the universe as a question, the way he was breaking it down, doesn't make any sense, because location is two things relative to each other. And if you consider the universe as in one cohesive thing, there's nothing outside of it, then you would need to have something outside of it in order to place it. And I can't really do it justice, but it just like it pinged a similar thing for me of like, oh, the universe as a whole has no location. Did a similar thing to me, or for me, that like the earth has no weight. Like, oh, right, because we're always kind of thinking relatively and comparing like seemingly separate things, like this versus that. But when you're thinking as a whole system, that those concepts break down.
Breaking them down. Are y'all good if we keep reading?
Yeah.
Final chapter, chapter 9, I'll read it. Chapter 9, sensing binds all things. The electric intersensitizing of the two pulsing light extensions of the one still light is for the purpose of recording thought patterns in matter. Mind knows but one idea as a whole. Thought is idea taken apart and patterned as separate idea. Thought is patterned idea electrically expressed and electrically recorded in matter by its two pulsing interchanging lights, lowercase lights. This universe of matter in motion is but the electric record of thought. The process of recording is to take the one undivided universal idea apart and express it as many seemingly divided parts. This gives form and multiplicity into many seeming parts and things of a universe of but one thing. Electricity is the servant of the God mind. Electricity expresses the desire in the God mind for creative expression by seemingly dividing the one still light into transient waves of spectrum divided positive, negative colors of light. This entire universe of seeming substantiality consists solely of transient light waves in seeming motion. Motion itself is illusion. Seeming separateness. All patterned thought creations of God or man are the interweavings of the spectrum colors of the two electric opposites of light waves into the patterned designs of those thoughts. Creation might be likened to the tapestry weaver who knows the one idea as a whole, then thinks it into parts, then records those parts by interweaving their spectrum colors into the many forms which, together, manifest the whole idea. To exemplify our meaning, consider any one part of the whole idea of creation. Iron, for example. Iron is a separate part of the whole. We think of iron as a hard, cold metal with certain properties which make it possible for us to manufacture it into many products. When iron is in its frozen condition, we do not think of it as light. But we can photograph by it if we heat it to incandescence. Not only is it then light, but all of the properties which make it available to us as iron have then gone out of it. It is as though the divine tapestry weaver had unwoven all the threads of the idea of iron and sorted them into their spectrum colors, thread by thread. The physicist can tell you what elements those threads of light would be if frozen. Upon looking at them, he would say, that is iron. But it would not be the form of iron as we know it. It would be the formless idea of iron as the sun knows it. There is no separateness. In the incandescent sun is all idea that earth knows. The idea of the apple of earth is in the sun. Likewise, the wood of the tree and the violet in the meadow. Likewise, the cool earth is there with its rivers and mountains. All idea is one idea in the light of the sun. The light of the sun is never divided into its many seeming separate ideas until it is electrically extended from the sun, and those extensions electrically echoed back to it. The sun is a crucible which melts all ideas into one, then sets them out into space to cool and separate into many units of that one. Likewise, idea of mind never becomes the many ideas of creation until electricity divides that one idea into many separate parts. The one light cannot be divided, but extensions of the one light can appear to divide it. The spots of sunlight upon the cathedral floor are many, but they are all extensions of the one light of their source in the sun. Likewise, all mankind is an extension of the one idea of man, for man is but one in the light of his source. Likewise, all moving extensions of the one still light, as manifested in the white light of suns and the black light of their surrounding space, are but extensions of one source. All idea is still. The cinema exemplifies this meaning. Upon the screen are many patterned ideas in noisy, violent motion. We know, however, that all of the motion of separate ideas and all of the sounds emanating from those patterned moving forms would instantly cease if the still source of light from which these images and sounds are projected were turned off. We know that the cause of all this transient division into positive and negative effect is in the one still light from which it is projected. We know that the sounds we hear emanate from that stillness, yet we seem to be totally unaware of the fact that all of our pulsing universe is but an extension of one still light of universal mind, projected through positive and negative light upon the universal screen of space. It is difficult to conceive Earth and all of its phenomena of motion, sound, people, animals, and plant life as a motion picture projection from our sun. Yet all of the separate ideas of Earth are in that one incandescent light of the sun. All are but one thing, light. Turn off the sun, and all of its patterned ideas on earth would instantly cease. The still idea which is extended into motion is not in the motion, but in the stillness from which it is extended.
All right, y'all. I have a question about that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I totally agree with the stillness aspect of that very last sentence. However, if you turn off the sun and all of its patterned ideas on earth, would they really cease? Would they really? Like, I mean, we don't cease whenever we're in the dark. I'm still like, I've got a problem with that. That makes no sense to me. And in fact, I love the darkness. And more. I mean, I'm becoming I'm more loving what the womb space offers. So I have a little question for Mr. Russell in that avenue of the sun and everything would cease to exist. Now, obviously, we need sunlight to grow food. But he's talking about the patterns, in the motion picture. I don't know. I just wonder who does anyone have any thoughts on this? Yeah.
We're each sparks of the sun. So if the sun goes out, the light goes out in us. It makes perfect sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
We're sub-logoi.
It does to me too.
The sun is a sub-logos. If the great central sun went out, all the sub-suns would go out and then we would go out. But if just our logos went out, who knows what then, would the spark completely go back to the void, or would some semblance of soul continue on in time space kind of a situation? I don't know, but it makes a lot of sense to me that if the sun went out, all of the individuated sparks of that sun would also go out on this planet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't actually think that he's proposing it as like a literal thing. I don't think it's possible for the sun to go out. I mean, I know it sounds silly, but I think he's just trying to paint a picture for us of this metaphor of the projector lights. Like if the projector light went out, the movie would stop. We get that. I think he's trying to extend that metaphor into everything that we know in order to point out that everything that we experience is a part of the sub-logos's idea, which is totally congruent with what Ra says. Like the sun has this idea that's different than Sirius. It's different than the suns of the Pleiades. It's different than all, right? Like our sun has its own refined ideas that are unique to it. And we're experiencing them on Earth, but they all exist in the mind of our sublogos. And so if the sublogos, blinked out, everything would be gone. Like we are in the dream of our sublogos, and our sublogos is in the dream of its logos, and it's all in the dream of God.
I completely agree with that in that framework. I'm just, yeah. On page 53, he says, but an extension of one still light of universal mind projected through both positive and negative light upon the universal screen of space. I just wonder, what does that look like? Not just the positive light, but also the negative light. And then of course that brings Ra to mind, the positive path, negative path. But yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that back to the sub logo and the all of that, which I in my brain had forgotten. Yeah, but I just, because it all has its place.
Yeah.
Even the negative light has its
Yeah.
place. So,
Right. And
yeah.
that's what I hear you saying, May, is that it sounds to me like you're just trying to stick up for darkness and like the value of darkness, right? Like that's what you're just saying, like, wait a second, it's okay for it to be dark.
Yeah.
Is that kind of getting at
Yeah.
what you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not like, yeah, because we're I'll let it at that. We'll let it go at that.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to say a similar thing, that like, yeah, like he sort of painted this image of everything would vanish if the sun went out, right? And it seems like there's like a sort of positive expression that we can take from it as well, which is really just seeing ourselves and experiencing ourselves as emanations of the sun. And like, so we can experience it in that sort of positive expression too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our cells communicate via light. In the darkness inside our skin, and they didn't know this until the 70s, so he didn't have this knowledge when he made these statements. Each individual cell has a tiny little light spark. That is how it communicates to the one next to it and the one next to it, even more so than chemical. Our bodies communicate via little light sparks, which is why cold lasers are a thing and why they work. So throw that in the mix.
Yeah, totally. One, as science catches up with reality, and as we get into fourth density and all the sciences like turn on to what's really going on, it's all light. Everything, all forms of communication are interactions of light between light and light. And it's really exciting that more and more people are tuning into that, understanding in all the ways that light manifests in our DNA. Our DNA is like transmitting and receiving light, like light's all that's happening, but on different scales, of course, in different patterns.
Can I
wanted to
respond?
Can you give me just 1 second? I had bookmarked something I'd stacked myself, but now I forget this. Go ahead.
Just in response to the piece about, where you said, he didn't know that at the time or whatever, like science, the way I interpreted it was like science didn't know that at the time. But I think it's also possible that he did know that, because of the way that he received direct downloads of light. Anyway, that was all I wanted to say. Like, even if science didn't know that, it's possible he had the information a different way.
All right, so I'm going to get personal for a second. So I did a really huge dose of mushrooms one time. I was in Texas. I had this profound psychedelic experience, and I understood the surface of the planet like being this sort of roiling like interaction of like all the action on the planet Earth is on the surface. Like all the juicy goodness is on the surface. And I saw the fractal like light play of the surface of the planet. Oh my gosh, what the heck was the point of that? I was gonna tie that right in, all tidy and neat, like. Well, oh, that's what it was. Walter Russell's picture. I know that doesn't show up very well. I don't know if any of you have seen this painting. Have any of you seen that yet?
Yes.
We'll spend time with this later once we get more into the graphic teachings, the visuals. But I think that it's called the octave wave, and it's the most comprehensive image he's ever been able to like produce. Because y'all, he had the experience that I had, except at the cosmic level. Like I'm convinced of this. When he was in his illumination, he was beyond the veil and he saw the whole thing like churning. He saw like the at least the solar system, if not the galaxy, like doing its like fractal light dance thing beyond the veil. And then he's trying to like explain that, he's trying to like make that make sense. And it's not an easy task. Anyway, when I see that painting, it reminds me of the sort of small or tiny version of that I had on Earth, of like, holy shit, I saw the dance of light, the fractal, like pulsing, like, I mean, it wasn't as clear as I'm sure his experience was, because I was all zooted. But anyway, sorry.
Thank God for the zoot.
Yeah. I did remember what I wanted to say earlier, but it's that time. And I want to respect everyone's window and level of energy available. So maybe we should close here.
No, keep going.
I'm open to something else.
It's brief. I just wanted to point out, like, I mean, I think this is such a simple part of the teaching. I probably don't even need to say it, but this is relative to what you said, May, about darkness. It's like in the creator's unmanifest form, the idea of light and the idea of dark are there, and everything in between, all the colors, all the spectrum, any experience of seeing, I guess, I don't know what to call it, like experiencing light is there, but it requires the separation of that idea. That one whole idea of light is light dark. It's how Ra puts the slash on things. The idea of light is like dark. It includes them both. And in order for the creator to give itself the experience of being able to have that spectrum, to manifest that idea, it has to create the two things. It has to create light and dark to be able to set up the polarity of that idea. Like, all ideas are polarized in their unmanifest nature, right? Like, there's no idea of light that doesn't include dark, and there can be no experience of light without darkness. It requires both, and that's true of every phenomenon, every condition that light can manifest, not just like light and dark, but also hot and cold, and all conditions, hard and soft, etc. They're paired, they're all bundled. And this is, I'm trying to tie this to the teaching of, like, the idea is whole. God's idea is always whole. And if we were to try to, like, express the idea, it would have a slash, like Ra does. We would say the thing and the any idea has to include some. This is making sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Anyway, May, you're like sticking up for the darkness. When I was contemplating that, well, I appreciate that, by the way. And when I was contemplating that, I'm like, yeah, darkness is powerful and valuable. And of course, we could never have the experience of darkness if it weren't for light. Obvious. I mean, it's obvious, but that there is light is why we get to appreciate darkness. We couldn't appreciate it if all there was darkness, which isn't possible. But anyway,
I know we're at time, but I'm going to put something. Is there a chat for this?
there sure is.
I think, yeah, I'll put it in the chat, because it's it's an experience I had while I was in ICU, and I'll put it in the chat. So yeah.
Great. Thanks, May. I'm curious to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah.
Profound experience you had.
Thank you.
All right, y'all. Thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing this conversation and this exploration. Appreciate you all very much.
That's really fun.
Yeah. Okay. Until next time. Good
Thanks,
night.
y'all.
Mwah. Thank you.
Sweet dreams.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.